Along with Nora and Arlo, I'm honored to be a part of what we're calling Woody at 100. It's a whole centennial celebration of the life and legacy and music of Woody Guthrie. Basically, Nora, if you would start, talk a little bit about how the Woody Guthrie Centennial is meant to be, in essence, not just a look back at your father's legacy and the 100 years that we have known about him, but also about why this centennial celebration is important for tomorrow as well.
Like, to sum it all up, the reason we're here is because of my mother.
Amen.
Just to go back a little bit, my mom was the one who kept all those boxes of materials of my father's stuff before there was an archives, but had hoped that someday there would be a room where people could come and read and study Woody's creative works. And here we are, 100 years later, some of the goals that I think it was in the ancestral genes to create things like archives, things like these new books and projects that have come out of there. And yet there's so much more to be done. And I think it's amazing, the timing, like Bruce was saying today, the timing of 2012 being the centennial of Woody's birth. And here we are in one of the most important and screwy elections that the country has seen in quite a while. I think Bruce said it really well at the thing. When they got up there and sang "This Land Is Your Land" at Obama's election, the first African American to become president, I looked up and I said, you don't go anywhere from there. That to me was a signifying moment. But what we do now is we go on the next spiral. One whole spiral. It took 100 years to complete a first spiral. And I think the centennial celebration is really a kickoff to begin the next 100 years using Woody's ideas, words, philosophy, spiritual teachings, etc., to take us through the next 100 years of this nation.
How does his music today play a very pivotal role in America as to where we are now and where we might be going?
Well, you know, there's a lot of different Woodies. But I've been thinking about Woody as a guy who set up a lot of questions. And I was sort of fumbling around trying to think, well, what's the question? What's the question? And I couldn't get to it. Last night, Joe Ely and Bruce were singing with Alejandro's band, Escovedo's band, Going Down This Road Feeling Bad. And, you know, I mean, the guy's going down the road feeling bad. He may be heading for a place where the water feels like wine, but he is going down the road feeling bad. And that's most of the verses. And then they sang the last line, I ain't going to be treated this way. And I think that's, forget about voting. That's decision time, right now. Are we or aren't we going to be treated this way? Woody personified that question. Is how are we going to be treated, and what follows from that is how are we going to treat other people? And I think if you look at Woody's work, it becomes whole when you arrive at that question. And there is no more pertinent question for Americans this minute.
You know, Jimmy, you're from Oklahoma. Doug, you're here in Texas, and Joel in California. Woody lived in all three places. It wasn't until maybe last week that we felt a warm, kindred spirit with fellow Oklahomans about Woody Guthrie. He's been someone who has been certainly born there, raised there, but not treated the same way, say, Will Rogers or Garth Brooks or somebody else has been treated there. When you grew up there, did you know about Woody?
Yeah, I did know about Woody. You know, being in a college town, Stillwater, there's always a subculture that gets into the real history of a state, and I think the great joy for me actually last week was seeing Mary Jo live long enough to see the vindication. You know, his painting is now on the Capitol. Oklahoma Hills is the state song, and to meet after the show with the mayor of Tulsa and people that they were there. It wasn't like just a fringe in Tulsa that brought it. It's like the people that are moving and shaking Oklahoma have finally come to terms with it. I love that. And when I did my little article for the Oklahoman, I said, I will only do this article if somewhere in the article you put, we're here to honor the most famous Oklahoman in the world. Mm-hmm. And that is something that the state, I think, is finally coming to terms with. I think for a while they just couldn't grasp it. They had to Will Rogers this, or Toby Keith, or Garth Brooks. And they finally figured out this is the most historical figure from our state. And to see people like Mary Jo, who in the 60s and 70s, living in that type of atmosphere, where people are calling her brother a communist, an atheist, where she, like Nora, looking at his music and stuff, knew he was a very spiritual person. It had to be just like the scarlet letter finally taken off. And it was just a beautiful part of that for me, was just to see Mary Jo and people like Guy Logston that have tried so hard for so many years to make Oklahoma see the light. So,
the thing that I always find ironic is that people that have no idea and don't know anything about Woody Guthrie at all have totally already been influenced by him. I mean, they're just like, cluelessly pursuing their art without realizing how much Woody Guthrie is in there. Everywhere I've gone, California and other states, I almost always find out that Woody's been there already. Somebody will tell me something that happened in this local area where he's been. I've had the honor of being invited by some folks that knew Woody when he lived with Will Gear in Topanga Canyon a few years back when I put out my first Woody Guthrie album. Some folks got a hold of me that were up in Mariposa that sold Woody that little piece of land out there in Topanga, and they invited me up for a celebration of Woody's 90th birthday. And they told me a couple stories about when they first met Woody. Woody travels places that you have no idea he's been, I mean, whether it's geographically or just sort of inherently or spiritually. He's just in every piece of popular rock and roll music that's coming out. There's a little part of Woody in there, even when people don't realize it.
We oftentimes forget, we get caught up in Woody as a great American songwriter, but he was a pretty good person with prose as well. There's a new book coming out, and I want you to talk a little bit about how that happened and what it is.
Well, the history of the West is about arid conditions, and Woody Guthrie, after experiencing all this, went bumming down what becomes known as Route 66, or what Steinbeck called the Road of Flight. But he went looking for money playing guitar and metal mandolin in New Mexico. And outside of Santa Fe, he saw an adobe house. And he thought, why don't all the people in Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle build adobes? Because he found out how long those adobes were there. And it's cool in an adobe house in the hot months. The blizzards come. It's much better than these rickety shacks that were getting blown over and destroyed. And so Woody Guthrie wrote a novel that is a novel of genius, which will be coming out this year, called House of Earth, about a poor couple living near Cap Rock Cliffs in the panhandle of Texas. He's imagining if the government would allow people to build adobe homes in the cliffs, and they could live more like the Indians did, or the Native Americans did at Mesa Verde or something, like cliff-dwelling communities based around rocks, instead of building flimsy wooden houses on the plains, which are bound to get nailed, not just by Dust Bowl storms, but also winter blizzards. And so he meticulously writes House of Earth. It's a wonderful novel, and Nora and her great assistant, Tiffany, has tracked down for me the original dust jacket cover Woody Guthrie wanted. He wrote House of Earth on it, and he did a painting of the dream adobe home.
I don't know that anybody has the capacity to have a full understanding of anybody, let alone him. I don't know if he had it. I think what he was able to do, and the reason we're probably here, is that he really had the ability to distill all of us and put it into a way so that we recognized our own voice coming back to us. He said over and over again, let me be known as the man who told you something you already knew. But everybody in this room has a little voice that they count on from time to time that they recognize as being them. And I think the great ability of my father was the ability to see that voice in himself and to reflect it back on you so that when you get a taste of it, you recognize something that rings true to you.